Hey Brandon, how's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
Dude, I'm just super excited because we're doing our first podcast. How long have we been talking about doing this?
Feels like a while, but it's been, I don't know, 3 months, 6 months, something like that.
Dude, something like that. I think it's been more like, I don't know, it feels like 3 to 4 months to me. But I just remember how cool it was running you at church, and then all of a sudden we're finishing each other's sentences, and
Yeah.
it's pretty amazing. So,
Yeah, it didn't take too long for that to get started that way. So,
nope. We met and sparks flew. And here we
yes,
are.
almost instantly.
Totally. Well, so this is our first podcast. Why are we doing this? And I'll just kind of start, I guess. We're doing this, I think, because we see a lot of companies that, um, in fact, we know people in our lives who are running companies, and they're kind of, they can't take vacations. They're not organized enough to take vacations or to sell or to hand off to children or whatever. And they're reportedly a ton of businesses like that right now. And my thinking was, hey, you and I love talking about operations. We both work in operations professionally. We've been doing it for years. How can we help people? And so, well, what do you think? What's your take on that? What would be your version of that? Why we're
Yeah,
doing this?
I totally agree. And I know personally, I've had quite a few businesses that I've tried to assist in the past, or even businesses I work for now, both private sector and public sector, because I've worked for the government as well. And it just seems like it's a pretty common theme that operations kind of gets put on the back burner. And there are quite a few businesses out there that need a lot of help. And in some ways, I feel sorry for them and I want to be able to help them out. And it's just kind of been something on my heart for a long time that I want to help them get to where they want to be, get to their goals in the future. And it's something that comes pretty naturally to me. So
Yeah.
yeah, when we first started kind of talking together at church, it made a lot of sense. And like you said, we were finishing each other's sentences, and I felt like we both had a passion for trying to help the other businesses around us succeed and reach their lifelong dreams.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, totally. So we kind of put together, it's our first podcast. It's not super professional yet. It's not gonna be super polished, but we did want to make sure we had things to talk about. So I wrote down a couple of notes, and I'm gonna so we have a little let's define our terms, right? What are the terms and how are we using these terms to frame up this conversation? Let's say there's a business owner who's listening to this. How do we help them kind of structure an understanding of why scaling and growing in these different contexts, right? So we have scaling and growing, making your business so it can run without you, right?
mhm,
Vacations, things like that.
yep.
Selling your business, and then also handing off to a son or daughter when
Mhm.
you retire. So let's have a scaling and growing. And maybe I could ask you, what's your, let's go through each of these. Scaling and growing, what are your thoughts on that? Why does organization help with that? And why do ideas that you and I talk about help with that?
Yeah, and I guess to first define it a little bit,
Mhm.
because they aren't even necessarily, they don't always go hand in hand. Sometimes you don't need to grow, but you still need to work on scaling just because the business level that you've currently got is already beyond where you can manage. So you need to work on scaling your processes and sometimes your labor force and things like that, just so that you can even manage what you've currently got, much less growing. Then obviously, once you start growing, then you need to continue to focus on it because you got the systems have to allow for a bigger growth. So I think our talks that we've had up until this point make a lot of sense for people because it does help them get organized and allow them to scale and grow. Because if you're not organized and you're just always fighting on the next fire, you never have the time or the ability to work on getting a system that will work for the long term. Because at the end of the day, that's what business is. You're always looking, what is the long term? How can we get to that next goal?
Yeah.
And if you're not even thinking about that, you're never going to put something in place in order to get to that point. Um,
Yeah. Well, and I've even seen companies with a lot of ideas that are, they're always thinking of new ideas, really good
yeah,
ideas, probably, but they're
right,
not doing the basics super well. And so you have that visionary, but you don't have that, the ability to just like, okay, but who's doing the everyday stuff? Who's doing the boring accounting, all the,
right.
the operations, writing the policies and procedures and doing all those things so that when it's time to put in just a little more money, it's not scalable because you can't just add money. You have to now add another brain just like yours who can read your
Right.
mind because you can only handle so much and it all lives in your head.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And yeah, if you don't have the organization, oftentimes you'll just be wasting money because you're just going to try to throw it at something
Yep.
that might not even be the right piece of software, the right person sometimes, or the right process.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're wasting money on top of not scaling and stuff like that. And you're right, that is something I've seen a ton where you do have a visionary and they kind of jump from idea to idea, but
Right.
without that organization and that checklist and the correct order, you're not doing it in a orderly fashion. And then you're just spinning your wheels because you get 2 steps into that task or that idea, then you get 2 steps into a different idea, and you never see any of them through completion. And
Yep.
then you have so many ideas, you have no idea which one should be the priority.
Yeah. Well, you see that in marketing too. I think marketing is a great example because a lot of companies will create, if they're a creation company, they'll create a bunch of stuff, but they don't measure anything. So it's like we create a bunch of stuff and we know some of it's working, but we don't really know what's working because we're not measuring anything. And I feel like the ability to measure is almost in what implied, right, in scalability, the ability, and you're super good at measuring. And that's this in advertising, this idea of like, if you create something, what do you expect to happen? Well, then how do you measure that? And then how do you know where to put the money and then how to watch it and see if it worked or not? Or is it just kind of like, hey, here's another idea, oh, today we're doing this, and then and nobody in the organization can really keep up, nobody really knows what's going on. But if you have that top down kind of like, here's why we're doing what we're doing, here's how our culture does it, and then here are our processes, and then all of a sudden now as the owner, maybe in the founder, right, your vision is being encoded into the organization through policies and through that culture brand or whatever you call it, and now you have the ability for people to follow you.
Oh yeah, yes, I see that, and I think that's a very common thing that you just mentioned. That it just the visionary, sometimes the owner, sometimes not, both on a marketing and an operations side, they just they have an idea and they start down it, and then 6 months later have no idea why it's not working, or it might not be where they thought it was going to be. Without your measurables, you can't see those things.
Yeah.
And I think you're totally spot on that that is a really important part of scaling and growing is having those measurables. Whether it's the software does it for you, you got to create that system, but you got to do that on the forefront. You got to get it in the right order, just
Mm-hmm.
so that again, you don't spend 6 months getting somewhere that and then going down a path and then finding out, well, this didn't work. Because I'd even ask the question, how do you know it didn't work? Because you had nothing to measure it by to compare it to see if it is working or not.
Yeah,
But
define working, define work. Like,
yes,
what does that mean?
exactly.
What did we say
Yeah.
that meant at the beginning? And well, and before we go forward, because we're talking about scaling, I want to talk about making your business so it can run without you, selling, and then handing it off. And these
Uh-huh.
are 4 different things. But I want
Sure.
to point out and mention every once in a while that you and I have talked about this, and it doesn't, for companies, it doesn't have to be something where you press pause on all your business and then work on all this stuff. It's stuff that you can do. If you do it right, you should be able to do it in line with the other stuff that you're doing. Put aside like a little bit of time, but you don't stop doing what you're doing today.
Correct.
You're
Yeah.
just and even that Work the System, which is a really good book. I think you and I have both talked about, by Sam Carpenter, which I would recommend. um, he talks about how he got out of his situation. And I'd love to review his story at some point on this
Yeah.
podcast, but how he did it. And it wasn't, he actually was working way too many hours, and he ended up deciding, hey, I need to just like organize my business. So he organized his business while he was still working long hours and organizing it, but he started seeing his hours decrease the more he organized.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And
I mean, I just
yeah.
wanted to point that out because it's so, I mean, this can feel intimidating. And even the language you and I use, sometimes we're so deep in it. It's just, I just want to remember and kind of come up for air and just remind everybody, hey, this is not something that has to take over your life. It's not. And in
Yeah.
fact, yeah,
And I would add to that too. Like it's the same thing in your business as it is your personal life. That I mean, never in life can you hit that pause button. I mean, stuff always happens, and you got to react to it in real time. I mean, even in your own personal family, someone passes away, the world doesn't stop. And actually, it was just recently my father-in-law passed away,
yep,
and we had to do a lot of different things. And it was interesting. One thing I noticed is you drive to the funeral home and you notice how many cars are still just, they're going places, and people are going to the grocery store, and the world just keeps going. And it doesn't matter what happens, how significant, the world never stops. And it's the
yeah,
same thing in the business world, that no matter, there could be a recession, there could be bankruptcies working or going through the process, or maybe you're really growing and it's just like, man, if the world would just stop for 1 second, it would be awesome. And unfortunately, it doesn't. So it's that art of trying to make progress, create new systems, and implement them real time while everything's keep going. Because you're right, it just never does stop. And it's
yeah.
an unfortunate reality of life, I suppose.
And it doesn't have to be super complicated either. In fact, I would never tell a business owner, yeah, just take someone's word for a process. No, any consultant needs to help you understand why you're doing it and make sure that you feel like it's worth it. And if you don't feel like it is, you need to ask more questions or just realize it's not a value to you, because you can't afford to do things you don't understand. Even in marketing, I saw that. I worked for a company that they didn't understand really what I was doing, and I ended up just like kind of leaving. I just told them, hey, just let me do contract work for you, because they didn't really understand what I was doing, and I wasn't able to explain it to them in a way they understood. So it was just like not a fit. And I think that any business owner should realize, hey, this has to be something you understand. Take your time, be convinced, and then do it. Right. Like
Yeah,
I think everybody should be doing this, but be convinced. Right.
yeah.
Um,
And I think on top of that, that's the, you kind of tied it back. That's the importance of having organization. Because if you don't have organization, you never have that time to sit and actually be convinced whether this new process is the right thing. So
mhm.
you've got to be able to scale correctly and have that organization to give yourself that time to keep making things more organized and more scalable, which even kind of goes into that next point of making the business so it can run without you. I mean, it has to be so organized and the processes in a good place that it can run without you and allow you, if you need to step out of the business for a couple days or a week to make the right choices on a larger scale. So
Mhm.
I think you just kind of led right into that one quite a bit.
Yeah, and I kind of blew the all the kind of gave away all the stuff already, but with making your business so it can run without you, I think the things I wanted to point out were just that, like, how do you duplicate yourself in the organization? How do
Mm-hmm.
you how do you make it so people can make your decisions without you? That you
Yeah.
can leave and have a general manager or someone like that be able, or a foreman or whatever, be able to make the decisions that you would make.
Absolutely. And sometimes I think a lot of people pigeonhole themselves into thinking it has to be one person. Now, in a perfect world, one person would be nice because it's a lot easier to manage one than it is to manage many. But sometimes businesses and groups aren't at a scale where they can have multiple levels of management.
Mm.
And it's being able to dissect the decisions you're making and delegate out and train up maybe a team of people to make different decisions that you normally would have to make. So you might, if it's 4 employees and you train up each of those employees to make a certain set of the decisions that you make because you might not have the money to bring in a foreman or a general manager or something like that who can you can condense all of those decisions into one person. So um, just trying to work with what you have and not necessarily creating extra overhead or anything like that, and just scaling with the means that you've got. I think is a fairly important thing.
Yeah. And I would even say that if you want to hire from within, you want to hire, and that's like one of the cheaper ways you can hire and more kind of, gradual and I don't know, calm. I don't know what this is like kind of it's like a get to know, hire good people at the bottom, get to know them, and then bring them up. The ones that you feel, they have to have good basic values, obviously, like making sure they're not being deceptive and things like that. But and then once you realize like they have an understanding of the business a little bit, and maybe they want to understand more, now you're talking about, okay, can they follow our processes? Do they have the aptitude to work in the role that they're in? Well, those are two things. Can they follow our process? They have the aptitude to work in the role that they're in. So the right butts in the right seats is how EOS, I think, talks about it. And
Yep.
then do they have the values of your company, right? Do they understand the values of your company? And if you have those things, then you can kind of see whether someone's hireable and promotable in your company. And not only can you leave and take a vacation, and they're going to make a lot of the decisions that you would make and basically channel you, right? Your values are now
Mm-hmm.
reproduced in your organization through policies and through your values, personality traits, and your brand story. And everyone's united about it. It's super followable, super easy to understand for most people. And if they can't stomach your values, or probably it's not they can't stomach your values, it's they're too high for them in a lot of cases, and they just don't want to follow those values. Well, then they're not a good fit, and you can kind of tell that. And now you have something a little more measurable where you can really point that out. And now hiring, you're going to hire people according to your values now that you have them developed and defined.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, again, going back to organization, that's where being organized and knowing what the job description that you're looking for is. Because I see this a ton where people hire for something, whether it's an operations person, a salesperson, might be a technician, something like that, but they're not even clear and organized on what they want. And then you end up getting the wrong butt in the wrong seat.
Right.
And you don't have someone who actually is fulfilling the needs of what you were looking for. So it is important to be organized when you're trying to figure out that person,
Mm.
that what is it exactly that I'm looking for. Obviously you want them to have the same values, but even just from a operations perspective, what task do you want them to perform and at in which way? Because
Yeah.
I've seen people where they want to hire a technician, like someone to fix something, and then all of a sudden they realize, wow, we're not getting any sales in. It's like, well, what you were actually looking for was a sales technician, someone who's both sales savvy and a technician.
Right.
But they never dissected that, and now all they got are these people who can turn wrenches, but they can't actually sell anything, so the business never grows. So it's being clear and organized from a hiring perspective so that you get the right people in so they can scale and grow, and then the business can run without you. And again, it's just how organization kind of flows through as the common thread in so many of these different themes, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the processes too, I think understanding your processes helps you know how to hire as well and write that job description Because if you don't know your process, you don't know that you need that sales technician. You're like, oh, I need
Yeah.
a salesperson. Well, what kinds of questions are they going to answer? Oh, so if you know your
Yeah.
process, it's kind of like, it's funny, like plans are useless, but planning is essential.
Yeah.
That, and it's like the reason that planning is essential is because it acquaints you as you're planning, you're having conversations with yourself, with others about how this is going to play out. And so your planning actually prepares your mind for what's going to happen. And then you have your plan, and then the plan, even though, they say, oh, and then you scrap your plan, the first contact with the enemy or whatever, right? But you don't
Hmm.
scrap your plan. In reality, you're not scrapping your plan. You're just adjusting it right away, right? And so
Yeah.
it's not like it's really useless, but the
Yeah.
planning part is super important because now you
Yep.
know what you need.
Yeah. And I think I found in life that it feels like that plan is what allows your mind to kind of go on autopilot as the business is moving forward
Mm.
because you know what's supposed to be happening. And then when you have that set in your mind, it's one less thing you have to think about. And now you can focus on what's not working in this plan and what other processes can be improved and stuff. Because sometimes these things, there's no way to foresee that you need them. I mean, obviously, some of them you can, but some you can't. All of a sudden, something's been working really well,
Mm.
and you don't even know why it's working well until all of a sudden an employee quits, and you're like, ah, that's why it was working, is because this person had this skill set. Well, we need all of our employees at this in this position to have this skill set from now on. And but if you're so down in the weeds because you don't have a plan, you don't know where things are going, you might never recognize that subtle characteristic of that employee when they leave. And you won't know that you need to hire for that in the future. So again, that plan I feel like is something that allows your mind to kind of go on autopilot to focus on all the other little things instead of, oh my gosh, and you're sitting here worrying about where might we go because you didn't have a plan in the first place, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, totally. And so, two more things we wanted to cover before we have about 15 minutes left. So we want to talk about selling and then handing off to a son or daughter. And these two things are a little similar, I thought, as I was writing it up. But I thought they were different enough to where the conversation is a little different. Because a buyer wants a business they don't have to understand the first day. What did you agree with that? And if so, what it why don't they want that? Why don't I want to buy a mess that I have to hope that I'm going to understand?
So you're saying a buyer doesn't need to know
I'm saying
necessarily
a
a
buyer doesn't want to buy a company they can't understand. Like they have to, so they, let's see, a buyer wants a business they don't have to understand the first day. I'll just read the notes. By creating a brand and a process, you have an independently running business that can run without you, which is why you can take a vacation. It doesn't require them to hold things together. So why would, as a buyer, do I want to buy a company that why do I want to buy a company that's organized? I guess is what I'm asking. Like
yeah,
what's
okay.
what's in it for me, and why don't I want one that I'm like, I don't quite get it yet.
Yeah, okay, that makes a bit more sense as
Yeah,
you
I asked it
describe it that way.
awkwardly, but
I would say, at least in my opinion, if I was to buy a business, I don't want to have to buy it's a mess. I mean, I'm in a position where I'm able to have some free time and go look to purchase a business and things like that, which means I have free time. My goal isn't to then buy something that is immediately going to take all my free time away. And now sometimes a buyer might do that just because then they see that they can improve value of the business and stuff like that. If they're looking to say buy and flip a business, they might look at that as an opportunity. But
like a
generally
fixer
speaking,
upper.
yeah, kind of like a fixer upper home, but a fixer upper business.
Yeah.
So some buyers might want to, but I would say the majority of the buyers I've seen in life, they want to buy something that's going to give them a good return on their investment. And it's just like buying a stock in the stock market. I buy it and then I can walk away from it and it will just grow money over time. So it's a lot more valuable as an investor even to buy something that's organized, and or if it's a business where they're trying to acquire it to help grow whatever business they already have. I mean, maybe they like it because of the distribution channels and stuff. They want to be able to immediately take it and implement the distribution channel for their business rather than like, well, great. I have this problem in my current custom company, no distribution, and now I'm going to buy a company that I still have to figure it out. Well, I might as well just start a distribution company myself and do it the right way.
Yeah.
That they're trying to buy the business as a solution to their first problem, not buy more problems. So, yeah,
Yeah.
it
Well,
makes
and the other thing too is that, like, let's say you and me, let's say we were looking at a business, we would want to buy a business that had maybe some process debt, we needed help with processes or maybe marketing or something like that. And the issue is, though, if the business is disorganized and the finances aren't in order, and we can't see that for sure. We look at the financials, we look at these things, these signs, these, and try to read what's going on in the business, and we can't quite do it. So there's a lot of like, well, will we buy this business or would we buy another business that's more organized and we can actually see where the problem is more clearly? So if
yeah,
it's like you look at the financials and you can't quite understand the business, and what the owner's saying doesn't quite make sense with what you're seeing in the financials, and talk with a few employees or whatever, managers, and it's not quite making sense. You're going to be like, no, I'm going to have to get a super duper good deal on that business in order to want to buy something like that, right? Because it's a
yeah, for sure.
major fixer upper, and I can't even tell what the foundation looks like. I can't
Yeah,
even tell. I can't look at it, right? And so, um, that now that the owner of that business, are they going to make money? Not very
no,
much, because they have to offer it at a deep discount, right? And
yeah,
so what we're saying is like, hey, your business doesn't have to be perfect, but at least make it organized, and then, get a few things figured out. As you and I have talked about, like, how do businesses get ready to sell and get the most money from that sale? It's
hmm,
like, hey, make it make sense. Um, make it clear about whoever's buying this. Here's where the opportunity is.
yeah,
It's in operations. Like, you write better policies and procedures, and the income's going to go up. We're selling it
oh,
for this.
100%.
You know what I mean? So you know
Yeah,
what you're getting
well,
into. I know how to do drywall. I'll buy a company that needs dry, or I'll buy a house that needs a fixer that needs drywall, right?
yeah,
Because I can do drywall
absolutely.
all day. Give me that house. I'll buy it. It'll be a huge, sweet deal for me, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I'd add to that too. In the valuation of businesses, businesses are usually valued on a multiple of their net income. So if you have good operations and are organized, generally speaking, your net income ratio compared to your gross income is going to be higher, which is going to generate a higher multiplier and allow you to value the business higher. Because again, people are wanting return on their dollars,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't want to have to necessarily do it by putting a whole bunch of time into it. They want to see, hey, I can get an 8% return, 10% return on my dollars. Well, that is a direct correlation to what is your profit margin in your business. And your whole company will be valued on that. So it's just so critical to have the organization and the correct systems in place to allow you to achieve the highest valuation if you're trying to sell it.
Yep.
But to your point, if you're trying to hand it off to a son or daughter, that's not necessarily what might be in the forefront of your mind. Your forefront might be, hey, I don't want to hand this mess off to my kids. I want to see something nice and organized so that they can be successful in the future. I'm not so worried about, hey, I want to sell it for this amount. I just want to do something nice for them, give them something nice and clean that they can hop right into, and maybe they've worked in it the whole time and they understand it, but they can take it. And if they even want to take some time, you're not creating that labor debt, like you said, putting them in a pit where they can never take a vacation. You're providing their much more work-life balance in their own personal lives too.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And I think that's important. It's just being able to, you want to see your kids be successful. You've built this business, right? And
Yep.
not only is that kind of like in some ways a child of yours, like you could sell it, and it's like you'd still probably drive by every once in a while and wonder how things are going, but if you're handing it off to a child, to an adult child, to run, you want to make sure that things are in order to where they don't have to. You can even consult if you want sometimes, but they can't need you to run it all the time, or you should probably just hold on to it. I mean, you can always take time and just kind of gradually train them up, right? But you're probably doing that already. But it has to be organized, because if selling it to somebody is important, handing it off to your son or daughter is extra important, because you want to see them succeed for their own sake, and you want to see them succeed for the business's sake to a much lesser degree. But then you want it all to work together for their good and the good of their children too, the grandchildren, and to be setting people up. And you can do that. And you
Oh,
can do
absolutely.
that. I mean,
Yeah.
and,
I
and it's not, and I think that's what I want to just tell people, is just that, hey, I think you said it, you're talking about baby steps, right?
yeah.
Like, and so in the last like couple of minutes, yeah, yeah,
Well, I had
proceed. I
one.
think you
I
got
was gonna
something to
say
say.
I had one item. As you're talking about that, one word comes to my mind. It's legacy. You're leaving that legacy to your family and creating a memory of what you accomplished, as well as showing that you were providing for your family well. And as you're kind of talking about this, I'm kind of a fan of Duck Dynasty. And if you've ever seen the show, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it or
Yep,
not,
yep,
but it was the father who started a duck call business and eventually left it to the kids, and the kids got to run it. And now the grandkids are in it. And that business has now provided for three generations of the Robertson family. Now, it was the son who came in and did some of the cleanup because the father didn't have the business mind to do it.
right.
But it was still the idea that, look at this business that our father started. He worked hard. And I actually just got back from Louisiana about 2 months ago, and we went to their headquarters. And it shows like a little replica of his original shed where he was making these duck calls, and the hard work that he had put into it to leave this legacy for his kids. And I think it's just a wonderful memory to be able to leave and have a kind of a family history there as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there are probably a lot of people out there who are just like, well, my kids don't understand the business, and my kids have different abilities than I do. And I still think there's a ton of hope, right? I still
Oh,
think there's a,
absolutely.
I mean, part of it is just like, not everyone who starts a business and wants to hand it off to their kids has that structural mindset for a business. And that doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you're not the leader. It just means that, and that's why I think the rocket fuel, the EOS model works, because you have that acknowledgement of this innovative leader, or this like sales leader who just likes to get out and talk to people or whatever, right? This leader, CEO.
Mhm.
And then the integrator who does all the boring stuff and says, okay, well, is that what you want? Okay, well then here's here's what we think will happen if we do that. And then, by the way, here's how we'll measure it in all the departments. And it's a very top down kind of like, let's make sure it makes sense from the big picture down to the small picture. And now you have control over your business, because you're like, integrator, where's my dashboard? And the integrator's like, right here are all your measurements for all the things you said you wanted. And now you're going out and doing sales, which is what you do best. You're going out and creating ideas, which is what you do best, or whatever you do best, right, as a leader.
Yep.
And so now your kid wants to come in the business. Well, they might slot in somewhere. You may find out, hey, this business is organized, we know the job descriptions, we have an integrator. My kid is either the integrator, my kid is either the CEO, or they're just a super important role player and a shareholder, right? I mean, so there's
Yeah.
there's a ton of hope, I think, for people, and I think there's more possibility than some people think. And I don't think every kid's going to be a take on every parent's business, but I just think we're shortchanging the possibilities a little bit sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's partly the a big critical role in an operations or an integrator's job is matching task to talent. And
Mm,
oftentimes I've seen that children are the exact same as their parents. Go figure. That if the parent doesn't know how to necessarily scale the business, there's a chance the child might not be able to either because they got the same creative mind that their parent had or something like that. And realizing, hey, there are options out there and there are people who can figure this stuff out and have, and being able to match tasks with the children's talents and things like that. So the business keeps being successful, the child still successful, and everything flows through smoothly and the transition goes well. And again, you're continuing to pass down a good legacy. But yeah, there's a lot of options out there, a lot of people who can help with those kind of things.
Yeah, and the beauty of that is that with that model, the control stays in the control of the owner. This integrator person we're
100%.
talking about, which I'd love to talk about more, is just helping the business to make sense to the owner. And so
Yeah.
and so we have a couple of minutes left. So what I wanted to invite, Brandon, if you don't mind me kind of closing here,
Oh, sure. No
uh,
problem.
I would like to invite people if there's any watchers of this, the first podcast. So we're not expecting much, but um, I'd like to know what you want talked about more. If you're listening, I want to know, hey, what stood out? What questions do you have? What caught your interest, but you didn't quite understand? Let us know in the comments. And we're going to take that to heart, and we'll read those comments and maybe a QA section of our next podcast, perhaps something like that. But we will be interested in seeing that so we can address it, because that's really what's important to us, is helping people. The call to action, what we'd like you to do is like and subscribe. Right now, we don't have a big structure yet. We're just doing this for fun and just to help out. We love doing it, and that's about it. Reach out to us if you have any questions, or you just want us to expound on anything or talk about something in our next podcast. Anything to add, Brandon, before we go?
Yeah, no, there you tied it off really nicely, actually. And yeah, I love doing this stuff. I've been doing it for a long time. And at this point, I just want to help some people leave that legacy, it, leave a business in a good way, check off the life goal of having a successful business, retiring well, or just being able to have a life again and not be tied up with all the chains and weights of what a business can be sometimes. And I've gone through it myself many times, and I just really want to help people. Like you said, we don't have a following or anything like that right now. It's just purely just to help people out and help them realize their life goals. So yeah, no, I would love to hear some questions and concerns, or even just any kind of feedback so that we can try to help people the best we can.
Yep. Awesome. Love it. Amen. And awesome. So we're gonna be trying to do these regularly. But pay attention to the channel, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and we'll see you on the next round.
Yeah,
Thanks, Brandon.
no problem. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
All right, bye.